Ransom died Thursday afternoon. I found him in the chair in front of the TV, remote control in hand and eyes open. He looked almost the same as always, except his mouth was open and his eyes were glassy. I knew immediately that he was dead, but I touched his neck anyway, looking for a pulse, like they do on soap operas. His skin was still warm, but there was no pulse. I didn't scream or cry. I just stood there staring at him for maybe 30 seconds. Then I went to the kitchen and dialed 911. She sounded smooth, didn't even stutter. The dispatcher asked if I'd tried CPR. I said there was no point. My husband was already dead, and I was sure of it. The crew came quickly, 2 men and a woman. They came in, felt Ransom's neck, listened to his heart, took his blood pressure. Then the woman turned to me and said, "Unfortunately, my husband passed away. Probably a heart attack. I'm so sorry," she added. "It's okay," I replied. He was 73. At our age, that's no longer a tragedy, but a statistic. She looked at me strangely, as if I should be sobbing or hysterical. And I thought about the fact that Ransom must have missed his evening heart pills. He always missed them unless I reminded him. So I went to Muriel's neighbor's house this morning to drop off a basket of cookies. Then we chatted, and I didn't get back until 2 past in the afternoon. Ransom was already sitting there with the remote. That's all. After the medical team, the coroner arrived, an older man with tired eyes and a battered briefcase. He quickly examined the body, asked me a few formal questions, filled out some paperwork, and called the funeral home attendants. "Have you chosen a funeral home yet?" he asked. "Divitz and Sons," I replied. "They're just around the corner." It was the only funeral home in our neighborhood. Divitz had buried my parents, Ransom's mother, and now Ransom himself. I wonder who's gonna bury me. The kids? I don't think so. The paramedics arrived half an hour later, 2 men in strict suits. They put Ransom on a stretcher, covered him with a sheet, and carried him away. One of them handed me a business card. "Call me when you're ready to discuss the details. We're sorry for your loss." When the door closed behind them, the house was quiet. Only the clock in the hallway, given to us as a wedding gift, ticked. 60:99. My mom was still alive then. I sat on the couch, clutching the funeral home business card in my hand, thinking I should call the kids, but I couldn't bring myself to get up. Across from me, in the empty chair that still held the outline of Ransom's body, lay the remote control. It had never been taken away. Finally, I got up and went to the phone. I dialed the number for Delbert, our only son. There was a long dial tone. He picked up on the fifth. "Yes?" I could hear the slight irritation in my son's voice, as if I'd interrupted him from something important. "Delbert, it's Mom," I said, even though he must have seen my number on the screen. "What's wrong?" He tensed up immediately. "I don't call much, usually on holidays or when I need help with something around the house. Dad died today. Heart attack." There was a pause. I could hear the sound of the TV and a woman's voice in the background, probably Lorene, his wife. "Oh, shit," Delbert finally exhaled. "You okay? You doing okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm fine." There was another pause. I heard him cover the speaker with his hand and say something to Lauren. "When's the funeral?" he finally asked. "Tomorrow, 2 o'clock in the afternoon," I answered. "At St. Joseph's. Do you remember where that is?" "Tomorrow? So soon?" There was surprise and something else in his voice. An alarm? "Yes, Mr. Divitz said it could be arranged by tomorrow. I didn't see the point in dragging it out." "Mom," Delbert began, and I already knew what he was going to say next. "Tomorrow is Laurene's birthday. We've already made all the plans. The restaurant, the guests." I didn't say anything. "What can I say?" "You know, I just can't cancel at the last minute," he went on, his voice sounding excused. "We've been preparing so much. Lorene would be very upset. Of course, I said. I understand. I'm sorry, Mom, I really am. But it's just a formality, right? Dad would have understood. He's never been religious. Yeah, I agreed. He wasn't. Why don't I come down next week? Help you with the paperwork and stuff? He suggested, clearly relieved that I hadn't made a scene. Whatever you say, I replied. I have to go call Charlene. Okay, just hang in there, okay? And call me if you need anything. I will, I said and hung up. I sat staring at the phone. I should call Charlene, our daughter. But I already knew what would happen. She'd either not pick up the phone or find a reason not to come. Charlene always has a reason. It's work, it's a migraine, it's problems with her ex-husband. I dialed her number anyway. Long beeps, 5, 6, 7. Then the answering machine went off. I didn't leave a message. I dialed again. After the third ringing tone, the call was dropped. I tried again, and it went straight to the machine. So she saw my number and rejected the call. I sent her a message. Charlene, call me. Dad died today. The funeral's tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. St. Joseph's Church. There was no answer. I put the phone on the table and went into the kitchen. Poured myself a glass of water, drank it. Then I went back to the living room and sat down in the chair where Ransom had died a few hours ago. Strangely, I felt no grief, only fatigue and a kind of emptiness. Ransom and I had been together for 46 years. I can't say they were happy years. He drank a lot, especially when the kids were young. He used to raise his hand. Then, when he got older, he calmed down. The last years we lived like neighbors. We shared a house, sometimes had dinner together, watched TV. We didn't talk much. The phone vibrated, a message from Charlene. We'll only be able to make it for half an hour. Lots of work. Sorry. Better than nothing, I thought, and started packing for the funeral home. I needed to pick out a casket and discuss the details of the ceremony. Ransom and I had a little rainy day savings. I guess death could be considered a black day enough. I was met at the funeral home by Divitz himself, a tall, thin man with thinning gray hair slicked back. I'd known him for years. He'd buried almost everyone in our neighborhood. Mrs. Finch, he inclined his head slightly. I'm truly sorry for your loss. I nodded, and we walked to his office. He showed me a catalog of caskets and urns, though I'd said I wanted a simple casket and no cremation. Ransom had always said he wanted to lie in the ground properly, not dust on the mantelpiece. I opted for a simple, mid-priced wooden casket and minimal services, no limo or doves, just a church service and burial at the local cemetery where we had a family plot. Who will speak at the ceremony? Divitz asked, filling out the paperwork. No one, I replied, just the priest. He looked up at me. The relatives usually say a few words about the deceased. Our son won't be able to attend. It's his wife's birthday, I said in an even voice, and the daughter will only be passing through. Divitz pressed his lips together, but said nothing. He'd been doing funerals long enough to have seen things. I paid, signed the necessary papers, and went outside. It was getting toward evening. The air was warm and humid, typical of Mobile this time of year. I walked slowly home, thinking about the fact that tomorrow I would be burying the man I had lived most of my life with, and not even my own children would take the time to truly say goodbye to him. When I got home, I found that my phone was dead. I put it on the charger and checked it. No calls or messages. Not that I expected anything different. I made myself a turkey and cheese sandwich, poured a glass of milk, and sat down to eat dinner in the kitchen, at the table where Ransom and I had breakfast this morning. He was eating oatmeal and complaining that it was too runny. I promised to make it thicker tomorrow. It didn't matter now. After dinner, I went upstairs and started looking in the closet for a suit for Ransom. He had a dark blue, almost black one that he wore to funerals and weddings. The last time was for his niece's wedding 3 years ago. The suit smelled of mothballs and old age. I pulled out a white shirt and a pinstripe tie as well, put it all in a bag to take to the funeral home tomorrow. I put on my nightgown and got into bed. It was empty next to me, unusually empty. Despite our differences and the fact that we hadn't spoken much in recent years, Ransom's presence had always been felt, his snoring, his scent, his body heat. None of that was there now. I lay there, staring up at the ceiling. The house was quiet. Only the old clock in the hallway ticked away the time. Tick-tock, tick-tock, like they'd been doing for the last 46 years, as they will continue to do when I'm gone. Suddenly, I thought of tomorrow, of the empty church, of the priest who barely knew Ransom, of Charlene dropping in for half an hour between chores, about having neighbors standing next to me instead of my son, if anyone came at all. For the first time all day, I felt tears come to my throat. But they weren't tears for Ransom. I was crying for the lost years, for the way things had turned out, for the children he and I had raised, who basically didn't care about either of us. I cried quietly, no sobs, just tears running down my cheeks in the dark. No one would have heard me, even if I had sobbed at the top of my voice. The house was empty. I was alone, really alone, probably for the first time since I was 18. I woke up to the sound of rain. Drops drummed on the roof and dripped down the windows, blurring the morning light. Just the right weather for a funeral, I thought, looking up at the gray sky. Slowly, I got out of bed and felt my joints aching. Age takes its toll. 68 years old isn't much by today's standards, but when you work on your feet all your life, your body wears out faster. 23 years at Monty's Cafe, serving, cleaning, standing at the cash register. Then another 15 at Baldini's Dry Cleaners. It wasn't until I was 63 that I finally retired. And now what? An empty house, a dead husband, and kids who don't care about me. I forced myself to shower and dress. The black dress I'd bought 3 years ago for Ransom's sister's funeral still fit well. I didn't even bother ironing it. Who cared? I didn't feel like breakfast. I drank a cup of strong black coffee and looked at my watch. It was only 9 in the morning. The funeral was 5 hours away. 5 hours in an empty house thinking about how things had turned out. I found my cell phone in my purse and checked my messages. Nothing from Delbert, which wasn't surprising. One from Charlene. I'll be at the church by 2, but I can't stay late. Even on the day of her father's funeral, she couldn't spare more than half an hour. I put the phone aside and walked to the window. The rain had intensified, turning the street into a blurry gray picture. At 2:30, I was outside St. Joseph's Church. The funeral home's car was already parked out front. Mr. Dywitz met me at the door with an umbrella. "Mrs. Finch," he nodded. "Everything's all set. Father Harrison will conduct the service." I went inside. The church was almost empty. Our neighbor Muriel sat in the front row, an old woman with a recently broken hip. Someone must have brought her in. In the second row were the Hendrickses, who had lived across the street from us for the last 20 years. Behind them are 3 or 4 other vaguely familiar faces, people who probably knew Ransom from the Salty Dog Bar, where he spent most of his time. Charlene was nowhere to be seen. I walked to the front row and sat next to Muriel. She squeezed my hand with her knotted fingers. "I'm so sorry, darling," she whispered. I nodded. "What can I say?" The coffin stood in front of the altar. Simple, wooden, just as I'd asked. Ransom looked unusually solemn in his navy blue suit. The funeral directors had done a good job. He looked asleep. I walked over and looked at his face one last time before closing the lid. Strangely, I didn't feel anything different. It was like looking at a wax figure. At that moment, the church doors opened and Charlene walked in. My only daughter tall, with reddish hair gathered in a sloppy bun, wearing a dark gray dress clearly not meant for a funeral. Dark glasses hid her eyes, but I noticed her stagger as she made her way to the front row. I could smell the whiskey even through the cheap perfume. "Hi, Mom," she mumbled, sitting down next to me. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic." The clock on the church wall read 2 hours and 15 minutes, but I didn't say anything. Father Garrison, a young priest recently assigned to our parish, came down the aisle and began the service. He talked about ransom, though he clearly didn't know him personally. Standard phrases about a good soul going to the Lord, the grief of loss, and the hope of meeting him in a better world. I listened, half listening. My gaze fell on Charlene's hands. Her fingernails were bitten, and the band on her ring finger still showed the stripe of a ring that had been removed, the third failed marriage in 10 years. She fidgeted, checking her phone, clearly anxious to leave. The service went on as usual. No one volunteered to say a few words about the deceased. What was there to say? Ransom Finch, a drunk and a loser, had lived 73 years and left behind only debts, empty whiskey bottles, and a family that barely tolerated him. When the service was over, Charlene leaned over to me. "Mom, I really have to run. It's an important meeting. You understand?" "Of course," I replied. "Go." She kissed me on the cheek, a dry, formal kiss, and walked quickly toward the exit. Without even looking at my father's coffin, only Muriel and the Hendrickses went to the cemetery with me. The rain was still pouring, and the gravediggers were hurriedly lowering the coffin into the soggy earth. Father Harrison said a short prayer, and that was the end of it. Ransom Finch went on his final journey, and we went back to the cars. "Why don't you come over for tea?" Betty Hendricks suggested when we got to the parking lot. "Thanks, but I'd rather go home," I said. I had a lot to think about. They didn't insist. We exchanged awkward hugs, and I got into the cab Mr. Divitz had ordered. The driver didn't try to talk to me, for which I was grateful. I stared out the window at the wet streets of Mobile and thought about how quickly life turns to ashes. 46 years of marriage, and here it was, all over in a matter of hours. At home, the first thing I did was take off my wet shoes and black dress. I took a hot shower, put on an old robe, and went down to the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator, half empty, just like my life now. I made myself some tea and sat down at the table. Scraps of memories came to mind. There I was, 22 years old, meeting Ransom at a dance at the local club. He was handsome then, with a mop of dark hair and a white-toothed smile. Worked in a shipyard, made good money. I fell in love like a fool. Then the wedding, hastily organized because I was already carrying Delbert under my heart. The first few years weren't bad, although Ransom was already drinking on the weekends. Then Charlene came along, and everything went downhill. Ransom started drinking harder. Money was slipping through his fingers. The shipyard closed down, and he had to scrape by on odd jobs. And I worked, first at the cafe, then at the dry cleaners. 2 places at once, so the kids wouldn't need anything. Weekends, vacation, I didn't know what that was. Hands covered in eczema from the chemicals, legs buzzing from 12-hour shifts, head splitting from lack of sleep. Meanwhile, Ransom spent his days at the bar. I worked hard for the kids, saving for their education, for their future. Delbert even went to college, though he didn't finish it. He chose to work as an air conditioning repairman. Charlene started dating boys early, dropped out of school, got pregnant at 17, and had an abortion. With my money, of course. And here was the result of all my hard work: a son who couldn't tear himself away from his wife's birthday party to see his father off, and a daughter who showed up to the funeral hungover and bailed after half an hour. I sighed and looked at my hands, wrinkled with swollen veins. The hands of an old woman. I had given these children everything: my youth, my health, my dreams. And what did I get in return? The phone rang, snapping me out of my reverie. Delbert's number. I picked up the phone. Hello? Mom, it's me. My son's voice sounded strained. How was the funeral? It was fine, I answered. Few people, short service. I'm sorry I couldn't make it. Lorene would have been very upset if we'd canceled the celebration. Of course, I said. I understand. Charlene came by? Yes, briefly. There was a pause. Listen, Mom, Delbert finally said. Lorene and I have been thinking. It must be hard for you to be alone in this big house. Maybe we should think about selling. We could find you something smaller, more comfortable. Or, there's those nursing homes. They're really nice now with nurses and stuff. That's it. A home. Of course, they're interested in the house. Old, in need of renovation, but in a neighborhood that's started to improve in recent years. I'm sure they've already figured out how much they can get from the sale. I'll think about it, I said in a steady voice. Good, good, he sounded relieved. Don't decide anything now. I'll come back next week and we'll talk about it. How are you doing? I'm okay. All right, I gotta go. Lorene's got company. You hang in there, okay? I will. I hung up and stared at the phone for a long time. Then I got up, went to the window, and pulled the curtain back. It was still raining, turning our old garden into a swamp. The neighbor's cat scampered between the bushes, huddling on the ground to keep from getting wet. There was a light on in the windows of the house across the street. The Hendricks family was probably having dinner. I turned and looked around the living room. The worn couch, the old TV, the pictures on the walls, Delbert graduating from high school, Charlene at her first wedding, Ransom and I on our 30th anniversary, though we barely spoke to each other even then. The house where I spent my whole life. The house where I'd grown old caring for children who'd grown up and forgotten about me, and a husband who preferred the bottle. I walked slowly up the stairs to Ransom and I's bedroom. I opened his dresser and started going through his things. Socks, underwear, t-shirts, all old, laundered. Ransom didn't like to splurge on clothes. In the bottom drawer, I found an empty bottle of whiskey and an old tin box. The box was locked, but the key was there, taped to the bottom of the drawer. I opened it and froze. Inside was a wad of dollars, crumpled, old but real. I counted it almost 3,000. Where had Ransom gotten that kind of money? He was always complaining that he didn't have a dime. Underneath the money were some papers. I pulled them out and started to read them. They were life insurance receipts. The last payment was dated last month. Ransom's been paying for life insurance all this time? He never mentioned it. I put everything back in the box and sat on the bed. Outside the window, the rain continued to fall. The house was quiet, with only the clock in the hallway ticking away the time. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Something began to form in my head. Not exactly a plan, more like a vague idea. What if? I went downstairs and found a phone book in the kitchen cabinet. I scrolled down to the letter B and found the number of Horace Benning, the only lawyer in the neighborhood. Without deciding anything right away, I wrote his number down on a piece of paper and attached it to the refrigerator with a magnet. Tomorrow. Tomorrow I would call him and find out about my rights, about Ransom's insurance, about the house, about everything. I'm 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I can make a decision just for me. Not for my kids, not for my husband, for myself. The morning after the funeral, I woke up early. The gray dawn was dawning outside the window, and the drops of yesterday's rain were still dripping down the windows. I lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about the phone number pinned to the refrigerator, about the tin box of money and insurance receipts, about Delbert's words about selling the house. The clock showed 6:30 in the morning, a familiar rising time from years of work. My body remembered the regimen, even if there was no reason to get up that early anymore. I forced myself up, showered, dressed, routine rituals that I now performed alone. At 8 o'clock, I was already sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and my phone in my hand. Early for calls, but I knew I might change my mind otherwise. I dialed Horace Benning's number. After 5 beeps, a sleepy female voice answered, "Mr. Benning's office. We open at 9. "I apologize for the early call," I said. "This is Estelle Finch. I need to see Mr. Benning today. It's urgent." Pause. "Just a moment." The woman apparently covered the receiver with her hand. I heard muffled voices. Finally, she came back. "Mr. Benning will be able to see you at 10 o'clock in the morning. Will that be all right with you?" "Yes, thank you." "Our address—" "I know where the office is," I interrupted. "Thank you." After hanging up, I finished my coffee and went to the bedroom. I pulled out a decent blouse and skirt from my closet, not mourning, but severe enough for a visit to a lawyer. Then she opened Ransom's dresser drawer and took out the tin box again. I counted the money, $2,840, gathered up the insurance receipts, and put everything in my old bag. Before I left, I looked around the house again, as if with new eyes. Shabby carpets, old furniture, walls in need of paint. But the foundation was solid, the roof didn't leak, and the location was good, near the center, but in a quiet neighborhood. In recent years, I've noticed how the neighbors have changed. Young couples appearing, trendy coffee shops opening on the corner. But I've never thought about what that means for the value of our home. Horace Benning's office was in an old 2-story red brick building on Maple Street. The first floor was occupied by a flower store, and on the second floor, which was accessed by a separate staircase from the street, were 3 offices: a lawyer's office, an accountant's office, and a real estate agency. I climbed the creaky steps and entered the reception area. The young woman behind the desk, the same one who'd answered the phone, judging by her voice, lifted her head from her computer. "Mrs. Finch?" she asked. "Mr. Benning is expecting you." She led me into a small office with green walls and heavy wooden furniture. At the massive desk sat Horace Benning, a lean man of about 65, wearing thin gold-rimmed glasses. His gray hair was neatly combed back, and his desk was in perfect order. "What can I do for you?" He folded his hands on the table and looked at me carefully. "My husband, Ransom Finch, died 3 days ago," I began. "Yesterday was the funeral. I found the insurance receipts and wanted to know about my rights." I took the papers out of my bag and put them in front of him. Benning put on his reading glasses and scrutinized the papers. "Yes, this is standard life insurance," he said after a pause. "In the amount of $50,000. You're listed as the sole beneficiary. All premiums have been paid. I don't see any problem getting the payout." 50,000? I was expecting less, much less. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Fill out some forms, submit a death certificate, and wait. Usually, insurance companies pay out within 30 days after you submit all the paperwork. My assistant can help you fill out the forms right now." I nodded, still mulling over the amount. $50,000. I'd never had that kind of money in my life. "There's something else," I added, and told him about Delbert's call, about his desire to sell the house. Benning listened carefully and asked, "Is the house in your name or your husband's?" "Both of us, I think. We bought it 40 years ago." "In that case, as the surviving spouse, you become the sole owner. The children have no rights to the house while you're alive. It's your property, and only you decide whether to sell it or not." I was relieved, so Delbert couldn't force me to sell the house. "If I may ask," Benning continued, "what neighborhood is your house in? West Side, Old Magnolia Street?" Benning's eyebrows rose slightly. "Interesting," he said. "Have you ever inquired about the value of real estate in your neighborhood?" "Never," I answered honestly. "This neighborhood has changed a lot in the last 5 to 7 years. Gentrification has begun. Young professionals, new businesses, real estate prices have gone up significantly. How significantly? I asked, even though I already knew where he was going with this. Benning opened a desk drawer, took out a pad and pen, did some quick math. Given the location, the size of the lot, even if the house needs repairs, I'd say at least $200,000, maybe more if there's a buyer willing to completely remodel the building. I felt out of breath. 300,000? Ransom and I bought this house for 28,000 in the 70s. Are you sure? Was all I could squeeze out. Absolutely. In fact, he leaned forward, if you're really thinking of selling, I'd recommend taking your time and getting a few realtors to do an appraisal. You might even get more than that. I sat in silence, mulling over what I'd heard. 50,000 in insurance, 200,000 for the house, plus my modest pension and Social Security benefits, which I hadn't even asked about yet. What about Social Security? I finally asked. Am I entitled to any additional benefits after my husband's death? Benning nodded. Yes, you are entitled to a survivor's benefit. The amount depends on how much your husband paid into Social Security and your age. It's usually about 70% of the benefit your spouse received or would have received. I nodded again, trying to gather my thoughts. The unexpected wealth was making my head spin. For the first time in my life, I would have money. Real money. Not the measly leftovers from my paycheck after paying bills and buying groceries, but amounts I'd never even dreamed of. We spent the next hour filling out forms for the insurance company and Social Security. Benning's assistant made copies of all the necessary documents, and I signed several powers of attorney, allowing the attorney to act on my behalf. That's it, Benning said when we were done. I'll look into these matters and get back to you as soon as there's an update. The process usually takes 2 to 4 weeks. I nodded and stood up, getting ready to leave. But I stopped at the door and turned to him. Mr. Benning, is there any way? I hesitated for words. To make sure that my children would receive nothing when I died? His face remained unruffled, but something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, maybe. Yes, Mrs. Finch, there are several ways. You can disinherit them in a will, or you can give the assets to a charitable organization. Of course, the children could contest the will, but if done properly, their chances would be minimal. I nodded. When I've made my decision, I'll contact you. I'll be waiting for your call, he replied as he walked me to the door. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath of fresh air. It was a clear, sunny day, the opposite of yesterday's rain. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, mulling over my conversation with Benning. 50,000 in insurance, 200,000 for the house, a chance to start a new life, my life, at 68. As I passed the cafe on the corner, I noticed young couples sitting at tables on the veranda, fashionably dressed, carrying laptops and smartphones. There they were, the new residents of our neighborhood, the ones who drove up real estate prices, people who never knew what it was like to work 2 jobs to make ends meet, who didn't put up with drunken husbands and ungrateful children. I walked into the cafe and ordered a cappuccino, a drink I'd never tried before, thinking it was too expensive and excess. Sitting at a table by the window, I watched the passers-by and sipped the hot, sweet coffee. The thoughts in my head were slowly forming into a plan, not vague, not approximate, but clear and precise. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew how to do it. And for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. After finishing my coffee, I went back to Benning's office. His assistant raised her eyebrows in surprise when she saw me again. I need to talk to Mr. Benning, I said. I had made my decision. She escorted me into the office. Benning was sitting at his desk, looking over some papers. He looked up when I entered. Mrs. Finch, is something the matter? No, I answered, sitting down across from him. I just know what I want to do now, and I need your help with some paperwork. It had been 3 weeks since I had met Horace Benning. In that time, I've turned a vague plan into concrete action. The insurance company paid $50,000, just as the lawyer had promised. I signed a contract with a real estate firm, Prime Estate, to sell the house. Benning recommended them, serious people who know what they're doing. They appraised the house at $210,000, and to my surprise, they found a buyer almost immediately. A young couple from New York who had moved to Mobile because of the husband's job at a new technology center. They didn't even haggle. They paid the full amount, only asked me to expedite the transaction. I didn't call Delbert or Charlene to let them know it was for sale. Why would I? They only remembered me when they needed something. Let them find out after the fact. Delbert only called once during this time to ask if I needed help with paperwork after my father died. I said that was fine and quickly ended the call. Charlene didn't call at all. When the money from the sale of the house arrived in my account, I already knew exactly what I was going to do next. Horace Benning helped with all the paperwork, the new will, the charitable donations, the letters, especially the letters. They were an important part of my plan. Benning didn't ask too many questions, only occasionally allowed himself a slight chuckle as he read my instructions. I found a small but decent nursing home in Savannah, Georgia, far enough away from Mobile that the kids couldn't just show up uninvited, but not on the other side of the country. The place was called Magnolia Grove, a cozy 3-story building with a garden and a view of the river. Not luxurious, but clean and reputable. I paid in advance for 3 years' accommodation, ensuring a comfortable old age. But that was just the facade. I had actually booked a place at the Riverwalk, a similar facility, but in another Georgia town. Benning suggested this ruse, and I agreed. I needed to disappear so that Delbert couldn't find me, at least at first, until I adjusted to my new life. On the last day before I left, I sat in the kitchen of our, now former, home, drinking tea and listening to the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Tomorrow, the new owners would get the keys, and I would catch the bus to Savannah. Everything was ready, things packed, some clothes, a few photos, books. The rest I sold or gave away. 46 years of my life fit into 2 suitcases and a bag. Strangely, I felt no regret or sadness, only lightness and some quiet satisfaction. For the first time, I was doing what I wanted to do for myself. Not for my husband, not for my children, but for myself. In the morning, I gave my keys to the real estate agent, took a cab to the bus station, and bought a ticket to Savannah. My real destination, a small town about an hour outside of Savannah, was not listed anywhere. I bought a ticket there on the spot when I arrived. On the bus, I thought about the letters Benning would send to Delbert and Charlene when I was on my way. Dry, formal notices and my personal messages. Curt, but honest. I imagined Delbert's face when he would read about the sale of the house, the insurance, the fact that I had disinherited them. His outrage, anger, disbelief, perhaps even shock. And Charlene, her drunken tears, her accusations, her tantrums. In Savannah, I took a local bus to a small town whose name I don't even want to mention. It's not that I'm afraid Delbert will find the tapes. I'm just getting used to being careful. A car from the Riverwalk met me in the town. The driver, a friendly middle-aged man, helped me with my luggage and talked about the local attractions all the way. The Riverwalk turned out to be exactly as it appeared in the photos sent by Benning, a 2-story red brick building surrounded by a well-kept garden with a small pond and a gazebo. I was greeted by the director, Mrs. Fleming, an energetic woman in her 50s, and shown to my room on the second floor. "Welcome, Ms. Gray," she said, calling me by the new name I had chosen for this life. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." The room was small but bright, with a window overlooking the garden. A simple bed, a closet, a desk, a chair by the window, a discreet watercolor landscape on the wall, everything I needed for a quiet life. I unpacked, arranged my books on the shelf, hung my clothes in the closet. Then I sat in a chair by the window and just looked out at the garden, where a few elderly guests strolled along the paths. My new life, my real life, no obligations, no guilt, no need to conform to anyone else's expectations. The next day, as I was eating breakfast in the common dining room, getting to know a few of the neighbors, I was handed a phone call waiting for me in the principal's office. It was Horace Benning. "Mrs. Finch," he said in his subdued tone, "the letters have been delivered." "Both of them?" I asked. "Yes, to Delbert last night, to Charlene this morning." "I see." I felt strangely calm. "Any reaction?" Delbert called the office. Benning paused. He was upset, used profanity, threatened to sue. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "He called Magnolia Grove?" "Yes, literally an hour after he got the letter. And they told him I wasn't there as agreed?" "Of course they did. They're strictly confidential. Besides, you're really not registered there." I imagined Delbert's disappointment and anger when he realized the trail had been broken, that I'd really disappeared. "What's next, Mr. Benning?" I asked. "I suppose he'll try to find you, maybe even hire a private investigator. But if you follow our plan, no credit cards in Finch's name, no calls to anyone in Mobile, no social media, it's going to be extremely difficult to find you." "I'll be careful," I promised. "One more thing," Benning added. "He did mention the court, but like I said, legally you didn't do anything illegal. The house was your property, the insurance was paid to you as beneficiary, and the inheritance decision was your own business. There is nothing to worry about." After the conversation, I went back to my room and stared out the window for a long time. Somewhere out there in Mobile, Delbert and Charlene were getting over the shock of my decision. They were probably on the phone, discussing what to do, how to find me, how to get their money back. They saw me only as a source of inheritance, not a mother, not a person with feelings and desires. All day long, I waited for some emotion, guilt, regret, sadness. But nothing came, only the quiet satisfaction of finally being able to break free from the trap of family obligations, from a relationship that had long ago become a sham. That evening, I met several of the guests of the Riverwalk during a communal dinner. Gertrude Paxson, a former literature teacher, Walter King, a retired military man, Beverly Harris, a widow with 4 children scattered across the country. No one asked uncomfortable questions about the past. Everyone was polite and friendly. Everyone here had their own stories, their own reasons for being in a nursing home, and those reasons were respected. 3 days later, Benning called again. "Delbert was in my office," he reported. "Demanded to know your whereabouts. I, of course, refused. He threatened to sue me for malpractice." "Could he?" I asked anxiously. "No." Benning sounded confident. "I acted within the law and according to your instructions. He's just desperate." "Did he mention a private detective?" "Yeah, in passing. I think he did hire someone." I sighed. Of course, Delbert wouldn't give up so easily, not when there's that kind of money involved. "What's your advice?" I asked. "Continue to be discreet. Don't go online under your real name. Don't use old bank cards. Don't call old acquaintances. After a few months, Delbert will probably give up, especially when he realizes the detective can't find you and the legal fees are only going up." "Thank you, Mr. Benning," I said, "for everything." "You're welcome, Mrs. Finch. Or rather, Ms. Gray," he said, a slight smile in his voice. I spent the next few days settling in at the Riverwalk. I participated in the common activities: bingo on Tuesdays, movie screenings on Thursdays, outings into the city on Saturdays. Gradually, I got to know all the residents of the house. 27 people, each with their own story, each with their own character. But a week later, Benning called again. Delbert has hired a detective, he reported. But I'm not worried. All the tracks lead back to Magnolia Grove, and they don't know anything about you there. I've made sure your new name doesn't appear on any paperwork related to the sale of the house or insurance. If you continue to be careful, you'll be virtually impossible to find. And if he does? I asked. Benning hesitated. You are an adult of sound mind. You have every right to control your life and your money. There's nothing he can do legally. At most, he can make a scene. But the nursing home has security, so even that is unlikely. After that conversation, I felt calmer. Life at the Riverwalk was slowly getting better. I read the books I'd always wanted to read but hadn't found the time. I walked around the garden, enjoying the silence and beauty of nature. I took part in a discussion club that Gertrude had organized. I even started keeping a diary for the first time since I was a teenager. Sometimes, in the evenings, I thought about Delbert and Charlene, imagined their anger, their attempts to find me. But those thoughts brought no guilt or regret, only the quiet sadness of realizing that our relationship had always been fake, that they had never truly loved me, only what I could give them. The letter I wrote to Delbert was tough but honest. I said everything I'd been saying for years about his indifference, his calculating nature, the way he'd used me. Maybe it was cruel, but wasn't it cruel of him to skip his father's funeral for his wife's birthday? Wasn't it cruel to treat me like a burden for years, tolerated only because of the expectation of an inheritance? After a fortnight, I began to get used to my new name, Alice Gray. It felt right, a new name for a new life, a life of my own choosing. It had been 3 weeks since the letters had been sent. Benning had not called again with troubling news. Perhaps Delbert had given up, or the detective had turned out to be not so good, or, unlikely, he had accepted my decision and decided to honor it. Either way, I was ready for a new chapter of my life, a chapter in which I wasn't someone else's wife, someone else's mother, but simply myself, Alice Gray, a woman who was finally free. It had been nearly a month since I had taken up residence at the River Gap. In that time, I've gradually gotten used to my new name, Alice Gray, to my new surroundings, to the new people around me. Every morning I woke up in my bright room overlooking the garden, ate breakfast in the common dining room, spent my days reading, talking, and taking leisurely walks around the grounds. My new abode, a room on the second floor, was much smaller than our old home in Mobile, but there were no ghosts of the past here. No trace of ransom, no memories of scandals, drunken antics, long lonely evenings when the kids were grown and gone. The neighbors were pleasant people. Gertrude Paxson, a 73-year-old former teacher with a sharp mind and a love of crossword puzzles. Walter King, an 80-year-old widower who had spent 40 years in the Army and now collected stamps. Beverly Harris, my age, mother of 4 children, who had moved across the country and visited her once a year at Christmas. No one asked any unnecessary questions about my life before Riverbed. It was one of the unspoken rules to respect each other's backgrounds. Of course, over time, I shared some details with Beverly, with whom we had become especially close, but without too much detail. She, too, was disappointed in her children and understood me better than anyone else. Of my personal belongings, I had only clothes, a few books, a small TV, and a picture of my parents taken before I was born. Not a single picture of Ransom or the children did I bring. The past was to be left in the past. Horace Benning called periodically to report Delbert's attempts to find me. At first the calls were frequent. My son was persistent, threatening to sue, hiring a private investigator. But gradually his enthusiasm waned, and the calls became less frequent. For the last 2 weeks, Benning hadn't called at all, and I began to hope that Delbert had given up trying to find me. On the 33rd day of my new life, As I was returning from the dining room after lunch, the receptionist called out to me, "Miss Gray, you have visitors." I froze. Visitors? I couldn't have visitors. Unless, who? I asked, feeling my mouth dry. A man and a woman. They say they're relatives of yours. They're waiting in the visitor's room. Delbert and Laureen. They found me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. My first instinct was to run, to pack my things and disappear. But where to? And how long could I keep running? No, it was time to end this once and for all. "Thank you," I said to the receptionist. "I'll be right with you." The visitor's room was on the first floor, a bright room with cushioned chairs and low tables. Delbert paced nervously around the room, and Laureen sat on the edge of a chair, fiddling with the strap of her purse. When I walked in, they both turned sharply. "Mom!" Delbert exclaimed, his voice a mixture of relief and anger. "We finally found you." I sat down in the chair across from them in silence. Strangely, I felt no fear or excitement, only a calm determination. "Hello, Delbert. Hello, Laureen," I said in a steady voice. "What kind of a circus are you putting on?" Delbert stepped toward me, his face red with anger. "Sold the house, disappeared, left this insulting letter? And why all this masquerade with the false address?" "I wanted peace," I answered simply. "And I knew you wouldn't leave me alone if you knew where I really was." "Peace?" he almost shouted. "You disinherited us. You took everything and ran away. You call that wanting peace?" "Delbert, please," Laureen intervened, looking around nervously. "People are watching." He took a deep breath, trying to pull himself together, and sat down next to his wife. "Listen, Mom," he began quietly, but with the same tension in his voice. "I understand you're upset. Maybe we haven't always been attentive, but to disinherit us, give it all to some charity, that's crazy." "No, Delbert," I shook my head. "It's not crazy. It's a conscious decision." "But why?" He leaned forward. "What did we do to deserve this?" I looked at him. "My only son, the one son I had once loved more than life. Once, but not now." "It's not about what you did," I said quietly. "It's what you didn't do. You didn't go to your father's funeral. Charlene showed up drunk for half an hour. You both treated me like a burden for years, tolerated only because of the expectation of an inheritance." "That's not true," Delbert protested, but his eyes were running, avoiding my gaze. "It was Laureen's birthday. We couldn't cancel." "You could have," I interrupted. "You could have canceled the celebration, or reschedule, or at least come to the funeral for an hour and then go back to celebrating. But you decided that your wife's birthday was more important than saying a final goodbye to your father." Laureen turned pale and lowered her eyes. "And this is not an isolated incident," I continued. "It's a pattern of your behavior over the years. You've come only when you needed something. You only called when you needed help. The rest of the time, I didn't exist for you." "You're exaggerating." Delbert started to get agitated again. "We have our own lives, our own problems. We can't be constantly—" "Exactly," I nodded. "You have your own life, and I have my own life now, without you. Look," he changed tactics abruptly, his voice almost pleading. "We can fix this. We'll visit you more often, call you every day. Just change the will. We're your children, your blood. This money should stay in the family. That's it. It was always just about the money." "No, Delbert," I shook my head. "My decision is final. The money will go to a fund to help women who are victims of domestic violence. Women like me, women who have been beaten by their husbands and neglected by their children, but who have found the strength to start a new life." "You can't do that." He raised his voice again. It's not fair." "Unfair?" I grinned bitterly. I put up with your father's drinking for 46 years. I worked 2 jobs so you and Charlene wouldn't need anything. Denied myself everything so you could have a future. And what did I get in return? A son who can't even find time for his father's funeral. A daughter who only thinks of her mother when she needs money. That's what's truly unfair. Laureen finally raised her eyes and looked at me. There was a strange understanding in her gaze. We could sue. Delbert made one last attempt. Challenge the will. Prove that you're, out of your mind. You could try, I shrugged. But Horace Benning made sure everything was legally flawless. I have a psychiatrist's report of total sanity, dated the day the will was made. All the paperwork's in order. You'll only waste time and money. Delbert looked at me with hatred. The mask of the caring son had finally fallen away, revealing his true face, greedy, selfish, evil. You're going to regret this, he said through gritted teeth, when you're all alone, when there's no one to take care of you, when you die alone. I've lived alone for 46 years, Delbert, I said calmly, just surrounded by people who pretended to care. At least I'm honest with myself now. He stood up abruptly, grabbed Laureen's hand, and pulled her toward the exit. Let's go. There's nothing more to do here. Laureen rose reluctantly, but paused for a moment. Estelle, she said quietly, I'm sorry. I saw understanding in her eyes. Not sympathy, not remorse, but understanding. Perhaps she too felt trapped by family obligations. Perhaps she too dreamed of escape. You don't have to, Laureen, I said. Just live your life and let me live mine. She nodded and followed Delbert, who was already standing in the doorway, seething with anger. Goodbye, Delbert, I said after him. I hope you find happiness, even without my money. He didn't answer, but slammed the door so hard that the glass shook. I remained seated in the chair, feeling strangely light. It was the end of claims, the end of a sense of duty, the end of illusions about a family love that never existed. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, and Gertrude Paxson, my neighbor on the floor, came into the room. Alice? She used my new name. Is everything all right? I saw that man run out of the building, red as a crab. He was yelling something about ungrateful parents and the courts. I smiled at her. I'm fine, Gertrude. Just closed a chapter of my life. I sat in the empty visitor's room for a while longer, gathering my thoughts. Then I got up and went to the window. In the parking lot, I saw Delbert arguing furiously with Lauren outside their car. He was waving his arms. She was shaking her head. Finally, they got in their car and drove off, raising a cloud of dust. I knew I would never see them again. Delbert could threaten to sue, but even he realized it was useless. Horace Benning had arranged everything safely. My money was safe. My future was in my hands. After they left, I called Benning and told him about the visit. How did they find you? He asked anxiously. I don't know, I answered. Maybe the detective was better than we thought. Maybe I made a mistake somewhere. What do you plan to do next? Benning's voice sounded concerned. Do you want to move somewhere else? I wondered. My first instinct was to run again, to find a new hiding place. But why? Delbert had already said everything he wanted to say. He knew he was legally powerless, and I was tired of running. No, I finally said it. I'm gonna stay here. I like it here, and there's no point in running anymore. Are you sure? I could hear the doubt in Benning's voice. Positive. I think Delbert realized he was getting nowhere. Besides, he doesn't have a lot of money to spend on litigation, especially futile litigation. All right, Benning agreed, but be careful and call me if you need help. After the conversation, I went back to my room, sat down at the small desk, and took out a new diary I'd bought at the local store. I opened the first page and wrote, "Today I finally buried Estelle Finch, a woman who lived for 46 years for others. I am now Alice Gray, and I live for myself. At 68, I am finally free. From obligations, from expectations, from the burdensome guilt of not being a good enough mother, a patient enough wife, a dedicated enough grandmother. I walked over to the window. The sun was slowly sinking toward the horizon, coloring the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, birds sang. The elderly residents of the Riverwalk were strolling through the garden, enjoying the evening coolness. My new world, my new address, my new life. No husband, no children, no commitments. In the evening, I went down to the common living room for a poetry evening. Gertrude read Emily Dickinson's poems. Walter shared his favorite Shakespeare sonnets. Beverly shared contemporary poetry she found in magazines. I sat in a soft chair, listening to their voices, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. Alice, Gertrude said to me after the evening, would you like to join us on our trip to the theater on Saturday? They're doing Tennessee Williams' The Glass Menagerie. I'd love to, I replied, and it was true. I had time now, time for myself, for my interests, for new friends and new experiences. Before I went to bed, I opened my journal again and wrote, sometimes breaking the bonds of family is the only way to find dignity. Sometimes you have to lose your family to find yourself. I closed the journal, turned off the light, and went to bed. In the darkness, I thought I could hear the ticking of an old clock from the hallway of our house in Mobile. But it was only an illusion. The clock was a thing of the past, like everything else. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without anxiety, without guilt, without fear of tomorrow. I was free, free at last.